Hello viewers, Wildnorwester here. Thank you for sending in all your questions. I was looking forward to seeing what you were going to ask me, and I'm going to try and answer as many as I can. I've arranged the questions into 4 categories, based on the subject of them. So without any further ado, let's get started. I am familiar with tugs. I can remember seeing it on TV when I was a bit younger, and I also checked it out again once I got back into Thomas the Tank Engine. It's well written, and I do enjoy watching it. I think that what I like the most about it is the slightly darker feel to the stories. I am aware of Transformers, but I'm afraid I've never really been a big fan. My main interest outside of Thomas the Tank Engine is model railroading. I've built layouts in HON and HON3 scales. As you can probably guess, it took me a little while to figure out exactly what I wanted to do with model railroading, but I've finally settled on ON30 scale. I'm also a big fan of Doctor Who and the James Bond movies. My other top 2 TV shows are Mythbusters and Top Gear. I also own a Nintendo Wii console, and I'm currently playing my way through Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. I've always been a bit of a fan of the Nintendo games, ever since receiving a Game Boy Pocket as a Christmas present when I was growing up. My favourite fizzy drink is definitely ginger beer, but I've found that when I'm narrating my series, having a glass of tonic water on hand helps with my voice. I'm going to start by saying that I think that British steam locomotives are the cleanest and best looking in the world, even though my main interest in railroading is the North American railroads. But, as the most famous of the preserved British engines, I think that the Flying Scotsman is an ideal choice to act as the face of the preservation movement. I've liked Thomas for as long as I can remember, and it was one of my favourite TV shows when I was a kid. I sort of left the series after season 3 of the TV show had been released, and I only got back into it a couple of years ago. It was a pleasant surprise to find that the Skarloey Railway stories had been adapted to the TV series in season 4. As for the CGI episodes, well, if the writing improves then I'll probably watch them, but the ones that are being put out at the moment aren't the series that I remember and grew up with. This means that I don't really have a favourite character from the CGI series. I would have to say that Oliver would be my favourite character from the series, closely followed by the Scottish twins. I think this is mainly because of their backstories, that these are the engines that showed the gumption to try and escape to Sodor when diesels were taking over on the other railway. Series 3 would be my favourite of the TV seasons, purely because it has Escape in it. That is my all-time favourite episode of the series, mostly because of the plotline, but also because the music is awesome. Old Iron would definitely be my second favourite episode. And I guess the reason why these 2 are my favourites is because they're action-packed, but there's a solid story underlying the action. Also, the music in both episodes is very well done. I'm assuming this question is asking me whether I prefer to see the episodes made with models or with CGI animation. I would have to say that the models are my favourite, mainly because they're what I grew up with, but it's just, to me, the models seem to have a sort of realism that the CGI series lack. Splatter and Dodge. I'm afraid I've only seen Thomas and the Magic Railroad once, and that was a while ago, so I don't really have an opinion of these 2 engines. But from what I can recall, they seem to be the Maxwell Smarts of the TV series. Enterprising Engines would have to be my favourite Railway series book, hands down. I mean, it has my 2 favourite Railway series stories, Escape and Super Rescue, in it. It's also got a bit of a darker feeling to it than most of the other Railway series books, which is something I enjoy about it. Another aspect of this book that I like is Flying Scotsman's appearance, as that helps tie the series into the real history of British railways. Super Rescue would be my first pick to be made into a TV series episode, and I think it would have fit in well with the rest of the series 3 episodes. For my second pick, I would have to say Devil's Back. It's a good, action-packed story with a solid plot, and I think some of the visual elements would look great on television. It's also got some good character development, given that it's the conclusion to Lord Harry's sort of fall from grace and redemption. Well, As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I only recently got back into Thomas the Tank Engine, after being away from it for quite a few years. This was the first time I'd actually discovered the fan-made episodes that are on YouTube, and there were two that caught my attention. The first was a remake of Super Rescue by Damocles178. It made me aware that there was a whole community of Thomas fans who were keeping the Railway series alive, and that I could do the same thing. The Dark Times by Scarloy123 was also inspirational for me. After seeing that a well-written, original series could be successful on YouTube, I decided to take a crack at it myself. The short answer is that the year gap between each season is whatever I need it to be in order to tell the stories that I want. I think at this point it might be best if I lay out some of my plans for the future of the series. Season 4 will be 12 episodes long and will take place in 1984. Season 5 is due to take place in 1993, but that won't be coming out immediately after Season 4. I have a couple of other things planned. The first of these will be a special, which will be at least half an hour long. I'm not sure if this qualifies as feature length or not, but it's the only thing that'll be done that's approaching a Sodor the Early Years movie. I'll tell you a bit more about this later. Following the special, there's going to be a 4-part miniseries taking place in 1985. This will be based on a character that almost made it into the Railway series, Barry, the rescue engine. Season 5 will be coming out after these two specials, and will be between 6 and 8 episodes long. As I mentioned earlier, this season will take place in 1993. The main reason for this is because I want to do a story looking at the Fat Controller's family, but in order to do this, I need his children to be teenagers. I'm afraid that Season 5 will be the end of Sodor the Early Years, but I have another series planned out. I don't want to give away too much, but this new series will be called Sodor, the Modern Years. It will pick up in 2009, 16 years after Sodor the Early Years has finished. It will still be the same Sodor we know, with steam ruling the rails, but there will be a couple of modern touches. Some goods will be carried in container trains, and the Fat Controller will be using a smartphone to help coordinate the running of the railway. We've already seen a little bit of how Diesel's character will be developing in the episode First Impressions. As seen in this clip from one of the upcoming episodes, he's sort of found his niche on Sodor. Early the next morning, Diesel was working in the yard, getting the first trains of the day ready to go out. Since being put in charge of the yard 3 years ago, Diesel had developed a rather efficient system for handling the trucks. He was proud of the way he handled the yard, and the Fat Controller knew that if a train did leave the yard late, it wouldn't be Diesel's fault. Diesel was aware that not all of the other engines trusted him, but none of them could fault his professionalism. In Season 4, we're going to be seeing how Diesel handles it when that efficiency isn't enough, and the mistrust between him and some of the steam engines will also be explored. Now, I've grouped these next 3 questions together for a reason. When I posted my version of Henry Sees Red, I mentioned that would be the last episode I would be basing on a Railway series story, aside from the special I mentioned earlier. That special will be based on the book Duck and the Diesel Engine. It's going to be looking at those events from Diesel's point of view, and also the effect that those events had on some of the steam engines, and his relationship with them in the present. After this, all my stories and episodes will be completely original. In Season 4, we will have one episode looking at what happened to Winston. This one will actually be based on a true story, and will also see the return of Patrick, given that most of it takes place on the other railway. Patrick will be looking a little bit different when he returns. As he was my first original character, I figured it was time that he received a model of his own. I currently don't have any plans for flashback-style stories about Alice's past. However, some aspects of it will be mentioned in other stories. I consider the Kirk Ronan branch line to be mainly a tourist line, taking visitors to and from the seaside resort town of Kirk Ronan. We don't really hear too much about it in the Railway series, so I've had to come up with my own history for the line. As a result of the Great Depression, tourist traffic on the line dried up, and in 1934 the line was abandoned. As for what's going to happen to it, well, there are only 2 things you can really do with abandoned branch lines. reopen them, or turn them into bike trails, and the Fat Controller is not really a cyclist. The reopened branch line is also going to need motive power, so we're going to be seeing a new character in the form of Eric. He will be built during Season 4 to look after the Kirkronan branch line, and is based on an LNER V3 class tank engine. Other characters I'll be making for future episodes include Jeff, the Works Diesel, who will be based on a Class 47, and Barry the Rescue Engine. According to the Thomas the Tank Engine Wikia, Barry is supposed to have been based on a British Rail Standard Class 2, which is originally based on the LMS 2MT. I have been able to obtain drawings of both the tank and tender versions of the 2MT. I'll be doing Barry as the tender engine version. Season 5 won't see the introduction of any new characters, other than Jock on the Arlesdale Railway. I will also be making a model of Tornado, the Peppercorn A1, for Sodor, the modern years. At the moment, it looks like he'll be using Arthur's faces. Those are all the future characters I have planned out, for the moment. I'm afraid I don't really have a top 5 character list for my series. I try to feature all of the engines equally to provide a bit of balance to the stories. There will be future flashback episodes. As well as the previously mentioned special, there is actually a 2-part episode in Season 4 that looks at what Donald and Douglas did when Donald was sold to the North West Railway. I don't want to give away too much, but both of those episodes are narrated from Douglas's point of view. After all, he was the one who was on the run. I have got a ghost-type story planned for Season 4, and in fact I'm about to start filming it. It will be featuring Bill and Ben, along with some things that go bump in the night at the China Clay Quarry. I'm mainly trying to capture the flavour of the Railway series in my episodes. I can't seem to recall too many spooky or scary stories in the books. I think those are mainly a product of the TV series. I would consider Devil's Back to be the closest thing to an adventure in the Railway series, with the storm raging and the rescue mission needing to be done on the mountain. I have got an episode planned for Season 4 along similar lines, with one of the engines needing to perform a winter rescue. I have tried writing an original story for the CULDEE Fell Railway, but I'm afraid I ran into the same problem that the Reverend Audrey did, namely, that there's not much that can be done with a mountain railway that wasn't already covered in mountain engines. I've used a few routes that weren't from Sodor Island 3D on my own, and these are the 3 that you will have seen most commonly. The Arlesdale Railway is from a website called Sodor Workshops, although for Season 5 onwards, I'll be using the version on Train 4755's Railway Series Island of Sodor route. The Barrow-in-Furness route is done by a chap called Sonic Toad Thomas, and is hosted by Sodor Productions 3D. This route here is called Compton Magna, and is by a lady called Angela Halliday. It's available on the download station, and I generally use it to represent the other railway near Sodor, on the other side of Barrow-in-Furness. There are 2 main reasons why I don't have a voice cast. The first of these is that I consider George Carlin to have been the best narrator of the TV series, and so I've chosen to follow his style of narration. Having said that, I have asked a female friend to voice the girl characters, as my female voice does not sound good, trust me. The second reason is because of the way I work. Even though I pre-write my episodes, that's by no means set in stone. It's not unusual for me to add or edit scenes while the episodes are being filmed, or even while they're being put together. If I tried to work this way with a voice cast, there would be a lot of toing and froing with each update. Also, any last-minute changes could result in delays to the upload of the episodes. There have been a few deleted and cancelled episodes, most of which didn't get any further than having the script written. There are a few episodes that have been shunted from one season to another. For example, episode 44, Rough Engines, was originally meant to be in Season 3. As for the discarded scripts, some of them have actually been recycled into the episodes that you'll be seeing. The ones that never made it at all, well, there's too many for me to go into all of them. There was a Christmas story from Season 3, in which the Fat Controller picked Edward to bring in the Christmas tree for that year's party. However, after Edward has an accident, Diesel needs to bring it in instead, and he's running rather late. The other engines think that he's playing a trick on them, until he's rescued from a snowdrift. When he does eventually reach Knapford Sheds, the engines apologise for misjudging him, and he apologises for what he did on his first visit to Sodor. I dropped this episode mainly because the whole apology thing was a bit sudden, and I've decided instead to gradually develop Diesel's character towards this point, although I'm not saying whether he will actually apologise or not. Another two-parter involved Sarah, the historian from Whispers, working with Eric and finding Neil abandoned in a shed at Kirk Ronan. It wasn't until after I'd written this episode that I realised I'd accidentally copied Sleeping Beauty. One episode that didn't make it past the plotting stage was to have been a Doctor Who crossover, but the Time Lord would only have a small cameo appearance in it. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the John Pertwee episodes of the original Doctor Who TV series. During this particular period of the show's history, the Doctor was exiled to Earth, and he drove a vintage Edwardian roadster named Bessie. This crossover episode would have started with Caroline the car feeling her age. Duck would have heard about this, and fortunately, his driver is the brother-in-law of John Benton, a former unit officer who now sells used cars. After the events of the Doctor Who episode Battlefield, Unit decided to sell Bessie, and so they turned her over to Benton. Duck's driver arranges for Benton to visit Sodor with Bessie, and the two cars go out for a drive together. While on this drive, they spot a tree across the tracks, and hear two trains approaching from opposite directions. Bessie races off to warn Bear, and Caroline races to stop Alice. Disaster is avoided, and Caroline's owner decides to buy Bessie as well. Later that night, the two cars are resting in their garage when an elephantine wheezing sounds out through the night air. Caroline is a bit scared, but Bessie reassures her, telling her that it's just the Doctor's other car. The third Doctor walks in a few moments later, and he says to Bessie that he knew that this was the day that Unit sold her, and that he just wanted to see that she was happy in her new home. She assures him that she is, and they make their farewells. One other episode that didn't get past the planning stages was an Olympic special to commemorate the 2012 London Olympics. The Sodor scenes for this special would have taken place on the Sodor that I envisioned for the modern years. The story starts with Gordon and the mainline engines being told that the London Olympic Committee wants to showcase some fine examples of British engineering. This is why they've arranged for the English members of the UK team to travel to London by train, with Gordon picking up athletes from Sodor and the north of England, and Flying Scotsman picking them up from the south. The two engines would then meet up outside London and arrive together in a display of synchronised steaming. Unfortunately, Gordon has an accident before he's due to leave, and so Henry takes his place on the Olympic run. Everything goes as planned until another steam train arrives. The French have sent their team by train as well through the Channel Tunnel behind one of their preserved express engines. That was as far as the plotting got, but the rest of the story would have involved Henry trying to communicate with the French engine when neither spoke each other's languages. The story would have finished with the French engine breaking down after the closing ceremony, and Henry, as the only engine available, helping him all the way back to Paris. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite get this story to work out properly, and I was running out of time before the Olympics themselves. Aside from this, I haven't considered having any other foreign engines on Sodor, mainly because I can't think of a reason why they would be there, and also because British railways are built to tighter clearances than European or American railways, meaning that a foreign engine wouldn't necessarily be able to fit. As far as parodies go, I don't have any on the drawing board at the moment. However, I have been toying with the idea of one involving Gordon, a dining car, and a certain Swedish chef. Top Gear, on the other hand, will probably be showing up in the modern years. Season 1 of the modern years will be set in 2009, and that's the same year that Top Gear's Race to the North, featuring Tornado, was broadcast. So don't be surprised if that shows up or gets mentioned in the modern years at some point. I consider my model making in TRAINZ to be a means to an end, that end being my episodes, so I doubt I'd be making any non-Thomas TRAINZ models from scratch. However, if there was enough demand, I would probably release the models I've already done as non-Thomas versions. My first reason for doing my own versions of Oliver, Donald and Douglas is to bring these models closer to the Railway Series versions. The ones on Sodor Island 3D are very good, but they're based on the TV series models. My original aim with Sodor the Early Years was to capture the feel of the early years of the TV show, hence the title. But, as I've developed the series, I've decided to bring it closer to the Railway Series universe. Secondly, doing my own models gives me the flexibility to make whatever changes to them I need. For example, I now have Donald and Douglas in 3 different liveries. I already had them in the Northwest Railway's blue and black schemes. When I decided to do an episode about their past in Scotland, it was easy enough for me to reskin them into the BR Freight black scheme, without having to ask another model maker for their permission first. The same goes for Oliver. When I was making Escape, I couldn't find a scrap Oliver model anywhere, so I decided that it would be simplest to do one myself. This also allowed me to do him in his British Rail livery. I don't mind people using my original characters, such as Alice and Eric, in their series either. All I ask is that I receive credit for them. Alice was the very first model I did, and I wasn't quite sure how to do the face. My attempts at creating an original face didn't exactly work out, so I decided to use the face from the female engine who's appeared most in the TV series. So that's it, folks. I enjoyed answering all your questions, and I hope you enjoyed hearing the answers.